So transitioning now from thinking about our own unique discipline style and whether we're more authoritarian, more permissive, or more negotiated. And again, most of us are a combination of those. On any given day, we may be at times permissive, at times more authoritarian. It just depends on sometimes what the child's behavior dictates, and then also on our own personal beliefs. But we do want to be kind of cognizant of what style we're using. Is it appropriate in the situation? And why are we using that specific style? Another thing that we want to think about, and again, Dr. Cornett alluded to voice in his presentation, but the teacher voice really does oftentimes determine the outcome of an incident. And so, first of all, what are the different voices? The child voice is very whining, it's blaming. The parent voice is typically either telling or ordering. It could be positive. Okay, and an example of that would be, hey, you really need to get started on your warm-up. I've got the timer started and you've got only 90 seconds left to complete the 3 warm-up problems, so you probably should get started. Or negative, you should not be talking while I'm talking, and you're sitting there wagging your index finger in the student's face, and you've kind of got a certain tone in your voice. That would be kind of that negative parent voice. The adult voice simply asks questions for clarification, for understanding. And so when we look at discipline referrals, 80% of all discipline referrals come from about 11% of teachers and paraprofessionals. And so thinking about, what does that tell us? Does that tell us that certain people are writing more referrals? Yes. Does that probably tell us that there are some characteristics of those individuals that make them high flyers for writing a lot of referrals? Yeah, probably so. It may be the content of the class they're teaching, the ability level of the students that they're teaching, or it could be their tolerance level of certain behaviors. And so we really want to think about, and again, we're not saying that, oh, you don't want to write a referral. No, there's absolutely a time and a place for writing a referral, but we do want to ask you to reflect on your actions and think about, did the student action really warrant this step of removing them from the instructional day and having them be suspended out of school or sitting in the principal's office? And so what we really recommend is starting in the adult voice and then kind of finishing in the positive parent voice, because what that does is it asks questions for understanding to make sure that the student understands their behavior. And then also you kind of end in that just very matter-of-fact but insistent voice of, okay, this is what you did, and so here's your consequence. So again, we're not saying that there aren't consequences, but how are we communicating those consequences? So again, thinking about Dr. Ruby Payne's work and the role of paraverbals and the nonverbals, this is just some example. I'm not going to read through all of those. You can see them. But kind of the different language that typically goes with the 3 different voices, whether I'm telling you just this is what you got to do, whether I'm kind of whining and kind of asking you to do these things, or whether I am kind of communicating and making sure that you understand what I need from you and what I'm going to do in return. And so a hidden rule of poverty is that one must always show strength. And so if an adult speaks to a student using the negative parent voice, and that student only has the child or the parent voice, then the student's going to also respond in the parent voice. And it doesn't usually work well when 2 people are trying to communicate both using the parent voice, both trying to tell the other what they should do. And so that often ends in an escalation, and that either usually ends in student being disciplined because there's some verbal altercation, emotions get high, things escalate, and if you get into a verbal altercation with a kid, you're never going to win. They're going to save face. You may ultimately win in the time that you think, well, they're going to be suspended or they're going to have a referral. But in that moment, they're going to do whatever they need to do, take whatever consequence they need to take so that they can save face. So the best thing that we can do is stay calm and just stay in that adult, calm, insistent voice. The adult voice also is the one that can help reframe and change behaviors. And so the child voice is the blaming voice. The parent voice tells me what I have to do, and it seems like I have no decision-making power or no authority myself. And so power and control become the issue, and it's not understanding. It's not about negotiation. It's not about compromise. And so again, we really want to use questions whenever possible to help resolve a conflict. And so one of the ideas that Dr. Payne shares is kind of using this kind of series of questions to communicate with kids. What did you do? When you did that, what were you hoping to accomplish? What are some other things that you could have done instead? And what are you going to do next time? What are you going to do differently? Let's think through what you were hoping to accomplish. How could you still accomplish that? I'm not saying you can't accomplish what you want, but how can we still accomplish that, but with different behaviors? We want to try to stay away from why questions if we can, because that usually kind of makes me go on the defensive and sets up that power struggle. So you can see it's, what did you do? When you did that? What did you want? And so we really don't want to tell somebody, don't do this, don't do that, don't do that. Instead, we're trying to give them a replacement behavior. And so this doesn't mean, when we're talking about mediating to change behavior, that doesn't mean we don't assign a consequence. Sure, you're going to get a consequence. If you break a rule, a school rule, class rule, there's going to be a consequence. But especially if I'm an under-resourced child, I'm going to serve my punishment, but then I'm going to repeat the same behavior in a couple days. And so the goal here is you've got to give me a replacement behavior. You've got to teach me what I should do differently, because if not, I don't know what to do differently. I'm exhibiting the only behaviors I know how. This is a phenomenal video, and the YouTube link is linked through Google Classroom so that you can watch it. And then there's a task in the classroom as well that kind of asks you to reflect on this. But it's really interesting to kind of see how the kid's day is differently when he's really acting with adults who are using more of that authoritarian style, and then how the day could change and how the whole climate and culture of a school and a classroom changes when it's more of a negotiated style of taking time to explain what we should do. Why should we walk down the hallway quietly to go to the playground instead of just, telling kids to catch a bubble and that's the rule? Well, why do we need to be quiet in the hallway? If you take time to tell me the rationale, I'm more likely to follow the rule because I don't see it as some arbitrary thing that's been imposed on me. So make sure you watch that video. Again, the link is in the classroom along with a task associated to let you reflect on that. And so the main message of the video is the way that we talk to our children becomes their inner voice, but it's not always our words. Think about all the other ways that we communicate to students. Body language, our position, our proximity, our posture, our eye contact. The verbal is the content of our message, the choice and the arrangement of our words, but the nonverbals are just as powerful. And that again includes gestures, facial expression. And spatial distance accounts for about 55% of what is perceived and understood by others. So, yeah, about 45% of what you understand is actually the words coming out of my mouth, but the other 55% comes from all of those other things. And so we want to make sure that we're aware of those things and we keep them in check. And we think about our posture, our positioning, our body language, our facial expressions. Am I scowling while a student is talking? Or am I lighting up with enthusiasm? Am I using my face showing that I'm kind of bored or that I'm confused by what they're saying? And so we just want to think about those things. Also about our pacing, our volume. If I'm talking too loud, I always talk really loud. And so sometimes I had to really think about, am I speaking too loudly for some students' comfort level? And again, we already said that 55% of what we communicate is nonverbal, which is really powerful when we stop and think about that. And also a little frightening that only 45% of what we process is really from what people verbally communicate to us. So again, thinking about tone, volume, cadence. Are we abrupt with students? Are we monotone while we're lecturing? Are we kind of talking very quickly? And again, it's just, you can say the exact same thing. It's just how you say what you say. And again, this is about anywhere from 38 to 45% of what people understand. So the teacher's approach to discipline. Great quote there by Grant East I included, that rules without relationships just breed rebellion. You can have all the rules in the world, you can have 15,000 rules in your classroom, but if you don't have a relationship with kids, they're not going to abide by your rules. We have to have a climate of mutual respect. And again, you are the final authority in the classroom. You cannot abdicate that role. You have to be the final authority. You can't give that authority to the kids. But if we want to build mutual respect, we've got to give high expectations. They can't be unreasonable. We've got to set the bar high. And then I've got to put the supports, the scaffolds in place. The bar stays the same for everybody because everybody in the classroom can meet the same high expectations, but you're all going to need different scaffolds and different supports to get there. You might need a different amount of time to get there. You might need a different path to get there, but we can all get there. And then I'm going to insist that you get there. I'm not going to move on until you got it. Whether that means that I'm going to pull you for a small group remediation, I'm going to get you to watch an extra video within Google Classroom, whatever it may be, I'm going to insist that you reach the expectations because I believe that you can meet them. And again, it goes back to that relationship. So again, on page 10 in your book is kind of that worksheet that we were just referencing about what you do when you did that, what were you hoping to accomplish that you can use with kids. There's a copy of that within Google Classroom that you can print off if you want to use that with students. And then also on page 11 and 12 is kind of a great checklist, and there's a task within Google Classroom tied to this checklist. But thinking about, as you self-assess, do you do these things? Do you do them consistently in your classroom practice? And then also, page 12 is the same checklist, but thinking about if I walked into your classroom, or if your principal or assistant principal walked into your classroom tomorrow at 10 o'clock in the morning, which of these things would they see? Would they see all of them? And this is not an exhaustive list. There are certainly other things to also include, but do you have a classroom of mutual respect? And do kids feel that their voice is honored? Is there equity of voice within the classroom? Thinking about the numbers, okay? So I want you to just kind of think about whether it's true or false. And if we were really together face-to-face, I was going to get you to stay seated if you thought the statement was true and stand up if it was false. So that's what those images are about. But then I decided to make it digital so you can just ignore the pictures. But is it true or false that girls are suspended more often than boys? True or false, boys are diagnosed with a learning disability more often than girls? True or false, 80% of discipline referrals come from 50% of the staff? Number 4, true or false, 90% of discipline referrals come from 20% of the students? And number 5, Bedford County Public Schools had 370 discipline referrals last year. Okay, so again, hopefully you've had time to think about that. And the fifth one I'll touch on just real briefly. That is false. We had more than 370 discipline referrals last year. Most discipline referrals kind of fall in the kind of what people refer to as the D's, for disrespect, defiance, that sort of thing. So what are the interesting statistics? For every 100 girls suspended, 250 boys are suspended nationally, and that is representative of Bedford County as well. In Bedford County, when we break down our data, boys are suspended more than 2 times as often as girls are. For every 100 girls expelled, 335 boys are expelled. For every 100 girls diagnosed with a special education disability, 217 boys are diagnosed. For every 100 girls with a learning disability, 276 boys are diagnosed. And so what do boys need? When we think about in the classroom, how can we best meet their needs? We really want to think about needing more physical space. So do they have more space between their desks? Do they have the option of flexible seating? Can they stand up when they need to? Can they move to the back of their room? Boys often get overstimulated by visual pollution. And so if they've got too much going on, they've got all these different things out on their desk, you may need to say, hey, Johnny, let's put your notebook away because we're going to focus on this chart now or this sorting activity. And so we really want to think about what we can do to specifically better meet the needs of our students. Again, some more, and we had touched on a couple of these, so you probably knew whether they were true or false. But 90% discipline referrals come from 10% of the students. 80% of referrals come from 11% of staff. We touched on those earlier. And one that I think is really interesting is that last one. 95% of discipline referrals come in the first and last 5 minutes of class. And so that's why we want to think about systems. Do we have systems in place? And that's what we're going to talk about next.